she was labeled non-essential until she remembered who she was. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with drama or raised voices. They don't kick in the door or knock things off the shelves. They slip in quietly. And years later you realize that was the beginning of the end. For Carol, it happened on a Tuesday morning that looked exactly like every other Tuesday morning she'd lived for the past 25 years. Same kitchen, same counter, same chipped mug she'd never bothered to replace. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets once children are grown and mornings no longer revolve around lunches or lost shoes. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the sink ticked louder than it should have. Outside, the sky was the color of damp paper. Carol stood barefoot on the cold tile floor sorting mail. A grocery flyer, a utility bill, a catalog she didn't remember ordering. And an envelope. Plain, cream-colored, her name printed neatly on the front, the way it always was on official things. She turned it over once, then again, no return address that mattered. She didn't open it right away. Not because she was afraid, not yet, but because something in her body paused, tightened, as if some quiet internal alarm had gone off, even though she couldn't explain why. She set the envelope down beside her mug and stared at it while the coffee cooled. Later, she would replay this moment in her mind, the way we all do once we know how the story ends. She would wonder if she felt something then, if her body already knew what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. But in that moment, all she felt was ordinary. And ordinary had always been her strength. Carol liked routine. She liked knowing what came next. She liked predictability. She liked being reliable. For 25 years, she'd built a life around showing up, quietly, consistently, without fuss. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed recognition. She didn't crave titles. She didn't introduce herself with big words or big stories. When people asked what she did for a living, she said, "I work at an insurance agency." She never added the rest. She never said how many people asked for her by name. How many clients relaxed the moment they heard her voice on the phone. How many times she stayed late, not because she had to, but because someone on the other end of the line was scared. She started at the agency when filing cabinets still lined the walls and forms were filled out by hand. Back when claims came in by fax, and the office smelled faintly of toner and burnt coffee. She learned every system, every workaround, every quiet rule that wasn't written down anywhere. But more than that, she learned people. She knew which clients needed reassurance before information, which ones wanted everything explained twice, which ones pretended they were fine when they absolutely were not. When someone's car was totaled, Carol was the one who slowed her voice down. When a house flooded or a storm ripped through town, she was the calm in the middle of the chaos. She had a way of making people feel less stupid for not knowing what deductible meant. Less ashamed for being upset. Less alone when something had gone wrong. She never thought of this as a skill. It was just who she was. Her coworkers depended on her in quiet ways. If a customer was angry, the call got transferred to Carol. If someone was crying, they sent her in. If something went sideways and no one knew how to fix it, they said, "Let Carol take a look." And she always did. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She listened. Her boss, the original owner, understood this. He trusted her. He once joked that she knew the business better than he did. And maybe she did. Not the numbers, but the heartbeat of it. She was the voice people remembered. And when customers said, "Thank you, you've been so kind," she smiled and said, "That's what I'm here for." But what she never said, what she barely admitted to herself, was how much she needed the work, too. The office gave her structure. It gave her purpose. It gave her a place where she mattered. After her kids were grown, after her marriage ended quietly and painfully, and without much discussion, the job became more than a paycheck. It became her social world, her reason to put on lipstick, her proof that she was still useful. She didn't talk about that part. Women like Carol rarely do. They just keep going. And then one day the owner retired. No big announcement. No celebration. He sold the business to his son. The son was polite, efficient, focused. He talked about modernization, about online systems, about cutting costs and streamlining operations. Carol listened. She nodded. She took notes. She didn't worry. Why would she? She had been there for 25 years. She was the place. That's what she believed. And that belief, that quiet certainty, is what made the envelope on the counter feel so strange, even before she opened it. She finally picked it up, slid her finger under the flap, pulled out the letter, and began to read. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Carol arrived at 9:45, like she always did. She hung her coat on the same hook she'd used for years, set her purse beneath her desk, and powered up her computer. The familiar hum of the office settled around her. Printers warming up, keyboards tapping, phones ringing softly in the background. Everything looked the same, and that should have been comforting. Instead, it made her uneasy. At 9:58, she straightened the stack of papers on her desk, though there was nothing wrong with them. She glanced at the clock, then again. At 10 o'clock sharp, the new owner stepped out of his office. "Carol," he said, already walking, "if you could come in for a moment." She stood quickly, smoothing the front of her blouse, a small unconscious gesture. She followed him down the short hallway she'd walked thousands of times before. The conference room door closed behind them with a soft click. That sound would stay with her. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't sit across from her. He sat at the head of the table. Carol took the chair nearest the door. She folded her hands in her lap. He cleared his throat. "First," he said, "I want to thank you for your years of service. You've been a valued part of this company for a long time." She smiled automatically. This is what people say before something changes. He continued, speaking in measured, professional sentences, the kind designed to sound neutral, not personal. He talked about restructuring, about efficiencies, about the future of the business. Carol listened carefully, nodding when appropriate. She'd always been good at listening, at reading the room. But, halfway through his explanation, something inside her began to sink. Not sharply, not all at once. Like a slow realization that the ground beneath you isn't as solid as you thought. Then he said it. "After reviewing our needs moving forward, we've determined that your position is no longer essential." At 10 o'clock sharp, the new owner stepped out of his office. The words floated between them, oddly calm. Carol blinked once. She waited for the rest of the sentence. For a clarification. For a correction? It didn't come. Her chest tightened, but her face stayed neutral. Years of professionalism held it together for her. "I see," she said quietly. He nodded, relieved, as if her composure made this easier for him. He slid a folder across the table. Severance details. End dates. Next steps. She didn't open it. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She thanked him for the opportunity to work there. He stood, extended his hand. She shook it, and just like that, it was over. 25 years reduced to a handshake and a folder. When she stepped back into the hallway, everything felt slightly off, like the air had shifted. She gathered her things slowly. No one made eye contact. A few coworkers glanced up, sensing something had happened, but unsure what. Carol smiled at them anyway. Of course she did. She placed a framed photo of her kids into the box, a small plant she'd watered for years, a mug with a faded joke printed on it. Her hands moved steadily. Inside, something was unraveling. When she walked out the front door for the last time, the bell above it chimed, the same sound it always made. But this time, it sounded final. In the parking lot, she stopped beside her car and just stood there. The late morning sun was brighter than she expected. Too bright. She set the box down and leaned against the door. This was the moment she thought she'd cry. She didn't. Instead, her mind went blank. Not empty, numb. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, hands resting in her lap. No one was calling her name. No one needed her. For the first time in decades, there was nowhere she had to be. The realization was terrifying. She drove home slowly, hyper-aware of everything, the red lights, the radio static, the way her hands trembled when she turned the key. At home, she carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. The house greeted her with silence. She stood there, still wearing her work clothes, still holding her keys, unsure what to do next. At some point, she sat down. The folder lay unopened. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter. "How's your day going?" Carol stared at the screen. She didn't know how to answer. What do you say when the thing that anchored your life has been quietly removed? She typed, "Busy, I'll call you later." Then she put the phone face down. That afternoon stretched endlessly. She wandered from room to room, straightened things that didn't need straightening, checked the clock even though time no longer meant anything. As evening crept in, the reality began to seep through the cracks. She wasn't just losing a job. She was losing her daily conversations, her sense of usefulness, her place in the world. The thought came quietly, without drama. If I'm not needed there, where am I needed now? That night, she lay awake long after the house had gone dark. Her mind replayed moments from the office, voices, faces, small interactions she'd never realized mattered so much. She wondered if anyone would notice she was gone. She wondered how easily she had been erased. The word non-essential echoed. It settled into her chest like a verdict. By morning, exhaustion clung to her like a heavy coat. And when she didn't get dressed for work, when she didn't grab her keys or her purse, something inside her cracked open. The routine that had shaped her days for decades was gone. And she had no idea who she was without it. The first morning she didn't have to go to work felt wrong, in a way Carol couldn't quite name. She woke up at the same time she always did, her body still loyal to a routine that no longer existed. The clock glowed 6:12 a.m., and for a brief, merciful second, everything felt normal. Then it hit her. There was nowhere to go. No blouse to choose. No familiar desk waiting for her. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. She told herself she deserved rest. That after 25 years, a pause was reasonable. But when she didn't get up, when minutes turned into hours, something inside her curled inward. By noon, she was still in bed. Not sick, not lazy, just heavy. The kind of heavy that settles in your chest and makes even simple decisions feel overwhelming. She turned on the television, not to watch anything in particular, just to break the silence. Daytime voices filled the room, cheerful, shallow, completely disconnected from her reality. She scrolled on her phone, emails she didn't need to answer. Updates from people still moving forward with their lives. She put the phone down again. The second day felt worse. And the third, she stopped opening the blinds. She stopped changing out of her pajamas. She ate when she remembered, toast, soup, whatever required the least effort. Time lost its edges. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth day, the thoughts began to surface. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. Maybe I wasn't that important. Maybe anyone could have done what I did. Maybe I should have seen this coming. She replayed conversations in her mind, looking for signs she'd missed. For moments, she should have fought harder, spoken up louder, made herself indispensable in a way that couldn't be ignored. But the truth, the one she didn't want to face, was this. She had been essential, just not on a spreadsheet. And spreadsheets don't measure warmth, or patience, or trust. They don't measure the way someone's shoulders drop when they hear a familiar voice on the phone. They don't measure the quiet relief of being understood. Carol thought about the customers she'd helped through divorces, accidents, losses. She wondered who was answering those calls now. If they were being rushed, if they were being treated like numbers. And then she felt foolish for caring, because caring hadn't saved her. By the end of the week, the grief had settled into her bones. It wasn't dramatic grief, no sobbing on the floor, no tear-soaked pillows. It was the slow grief of erasure, the grief of being quietly replaced. She avoided calls from her kids, not because she didn't love them, but because she didn't want to hear the concern in their voices. "How are you doing, Mom?" felt like a question she couldn't answer honestly. She told herself she'd call them later. Later never came. She walked through her house and felt strangely disconnected from it, like she was visiting someone else's life. The rooms held memories, but they didn't ask anything of her. In the afternoons, the loneliness sharpened. At work, there had always been background noise, movement, purpose. Here, the hours stretched endlessly. She sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window. Watched neighbors leave and return. Watched the sun move across the floor. And in those quiet moments, the real fear emerged. Not the fear of money. Not the fear of aging, but the fear of becoming invisible. If no one needs me, do I still matter? That question followed her everywhere. It echoed in the shower, in the grocery store aisle, in the empty space beside her on the couch at night. She applied for a few jobs, half-heartedly, positions that looked fine on paper but felt wrong in her gut. She never heard back. Each silence reinforced the same story. You're past your prime. You're replaceable. You've already given what you had to give. She began to believe it. By the 7th day, she hadn't left the house at all. That was when the thought came. Sharp, uncomfortable. No one is coming to save you. At first it felt cruel, then strangely honest. There was no manager calling to apologize. No company realizing its mistake. No rescue plan arriving in the mail. If her life was going to change, if it was going to mean something again, it would have to come from her. The realization didn't spark motivation. Not yet, but it cracked something open. That night she slept for the first time all week. Not well, but deeply. And when she woke the next morning, something was different. Subtle, like the moment before a storm breaks. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat there, hands resting on her knees. The house was still quiet. The future still uncertain. But for the first time since the meeting, she felt the faintest pull forward. Not hope, not excitement, just the smallest whisper of agency. And sometimes that's enough to begin. The next morning didn't arrive with fireworks. There was no sudden clarity, no burst of confidence. Carol woke up the same way she had all week, slowly, cautiously, unsure what the day would ask of her. But when she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, something held her there longer than usual. She looked tired, not just physically, but in a way that went deeper than sleep. Her hair sat the same way it always had, practical, familiar, safe. The style she'd worn because it worked, because it didn't draw attention, because it belonged to the woman she had been for a long time. She touched it lightly, and for the first time she didn't see stability. She saw stagnation. The thought surprised her. She'd never been someone who reinvented herself on a whim. She didn't chase trends or change for the sake of change. But standing there, she felt something unmistakable. Not to age, not to loss, but to disappearance. She picked up her phone and searched for a salon. The appointment was 2 days away, and just like that, the week had a shape again. On the day of the appointment, she dressed carefully, not for anyone else, but because it felt important, like showing up mattered. The salon smelled like shampoo and warm air. The low hum of conversation filled the room. When the stylist asked, "What are we thinking today?" Carol hesitated. Then she said it. Something new. The words felt strange and powerful in her mouth. As the scissors began to cut, Carol watched pieces of herself fall away, hair drifting down lighter than she expected. She felt exposed, and then relieved. When the stylist turned the chair toward the mirror, Carol barely recognized herself. Not because she looked younger, but because she looked awake. Her shoulders straightened without her telling them to. She smiled, a real one, and felt it travel all the way through her. On the drive home, she rolled the windows down. The air felt different. The next step came quietly. She hired a personal stylist, something she'd never imagined doing before. It felt indulgent at first, almost irresponsible. But as they went through her closet together, piece by piece, it became clear why it mattered. So many of her clothes told old stories. Work clothes from jobs long past. Outfits chosen to blend in. Things she'd kept because they were still fine. She let go of what no longer fit, not just her body, but her life. She kept what felt honest. And for the first time in years, she bought clothes not for who she had been, but for who she was becoming. As the weeks passed, Carol felt herself returning to the world. She volunteered at the local hospital help desk, 2 days a week. The first morning, she wore one of her new outfits. Simple, comfortable, confident. Patients stopped to ask questions. Visitors looked relieved when she smiled. She listened. She helped. And when someone said, "Thank you, you've been so kind," something inside her softened. She hadn't lost her gift. She'd just moved it. Then came the meetup group. Women her age, small campers, big laughter. They shared stories around campfires, traded tips, talked about places they'd always wanted to go and never thought they would. The first trip scared her. The second one thrilled her. She felt alive in a way she hadn't expected, not because everything was new, but because she was. Her children noticed the change before she said anything. "You sound different," one of them said on the phone. "Lighter," another said. They were proud of her, not because she'd bounced back, but because she'd stepped forward. Carol still had quiet days. She still missed the office sometimes. But she no longer felt erased. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Her worth had never been assigned by a job title. Her purpose wasn't something that could be taken away. It lived inside her, in the way she showed up, the way she cared, the way she chose herself when no one else did. If Carol could speak to the woman watching this quietly, late at night, she would say this: "You are not too late. You are not invisible. And you are not done." Sometimes the door closes not to punish you, but to push you back toward yourself. If this story stayed with you, I invite you to subscribe, not for answers, but for companionship on this road of becoming. And if you're standing in that in-between space, not who you were, not sure who you're becoming, there's a quiet resource linked below. A place to start listening to yourself again. No pressure, just possibility. It's time we became our own hero.